All right, so I just checked the waiting room. It looks like everybody is in right now, and we'll still admit people if they arrive a few minutes late. Good evening and welcome everybody to tonight's Finance and Advisory Committee's FY21 Budget Forum. First, I want to just start by introducing our committee. Alex Began is the chair of the committee. Mike Therian is the vice chair. Jim Purdy, Dave Molitano, and Carrie Gelsma. So tonight, the committee is going to give a presentation first, and then there'll be an opportunity at the end to provide questions to the committee. And you can do that by going into the chat function in Zoom and just type out your question. I'll be monitoring the chat room, and once they start the questions, I'll bring the questions to the committee's attention. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chairman, Alex Began.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you everyone for joining. Good evening. First off, I will call the meeting to order for FinCom as we're all present. As Anthony introduced the other members of the committee, I will not, but everyone's here, and I thank you all for attending tonight. 6:36, we're officially started as a FinCom meeting, and the purpose of this one is that of a budget forum to provide information on the FY21 budget. Of course, who would have thought June 17th, this beautiful mid-June evening, would be on a Zoom meeting? Definitely I didn't, and maybe some people even wish they were somewhere else. I'll hold off on that one. But in any event, the purpose of this is in addition to the warrant hearing where FinCom generally presents information on the upcoming town budget, as we always do and will soon, to provide an additional opportunity for residents to learn of the budget for a number of reasons, not the least of which is COVID-19 related challenges, which we'll touch upon, but also the difficult situation that the town is in with respect to levy capacity and balancing the budget without an override. So we'll get right into it. And I'm screen sharing and we're recording, so this will be made available, which is great. I need to click over here. And agenda slide is showing.
It is.
Thank you. Sorry to confirm. I, of course, can't see what you're seeing, and I have a number of monitors. Thank you. So for an agenda this evening, we have an hour and a half allotted to the Zoom meeting time frame. The structure, just in terms of quick housekeeping, is that of the open Zoom. Special thanks to Jackie Bresnahan, Director of Administrative Services for Town of Wenham, Anthony Ansaldi, Town Administrator, and Chris Holak, Finance Director, who's unable to be with us this evening, for arranging all of this and for all the help to the budget process that we'll talk about. But the format of this, from the standpoint of the meeting, is not the presentation only mode, if you will, via Zoom that many of you may be accustomed to in addition to this kind of open forum. This, we can see each other versus just me or other presenters. Most everyone is already muted, but just mute if there's feedback, please. And Jackie and Jackie and Anthony can enable discussion later on. We have prepared remarks, which will take us through at least 30, 45 minutes, somewhere in that range, most likely. We want to open it up to questions. Certainly that's the whole point of this exercise, is to hear from the public, to hear from residents as to what is on everyone's mind. I understand also that there is a school committee meeting of importance, as they all are, but this one in particular as it relates to their FY21 budget challenges, and that's happening at the same time. So that's this evening as well. Here's our agenda to focus on the high-level budget overview, process and timeline very briefly, and changes to it for FY21, given what we've experienced this spring and summer. A look at the primary revenue and expense drivers from a big picture categorization standpoint, and also in some more detail. We'll look at schools from the standpoint of Wenham as a member community in the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District, looking at enrollment trends in the FY21 assessment. COVID-19 is, of course, I mean, a major consideration, not only in our lives day to day, but in terms of the budget impact for the town of Wenham. Has had some immediate and material impacts, as you would expect. We're also thinking about the longer term financial outlook. Now, the financial warrant articles that residents vote on as the legislative body that is town meeting typically would have been dealt with by this time, but obviously are not. We are looking to July town meeting. So we'll give a review of those. That's, I would argue, where perhaps others would too, where the meat of this is. What are we, the residents, being asked to vote on with respect to funding the town of Wenham's operations, and what is the tax rate impact, hence the sub-bullet. What does this mean for my tax rates, and should certain warrant articles be approved, should they pass town meeting and or ballot or not. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we open up to public comment and questions, and we'll facilitate that. It'll be relatively straightforward. We don't have hundreds of people, for better or for worse, at this particular viewing, and so we'll be easily able to take questions at the end of discussion. So with that, I'll get started. Here's a word wall of sorts, which actually is a condensed version of what we might typically show for our budget overview process. For those who are less familiar with the FinCom's role in the budget and how it partners with the town officials, finance director, town administrator, town department leads, as well as our colleagues in Hamilton, FinCom and BOS there as well. This is just designed to basically say, well, what would we be doing in the late summer, early fall, typically working with the finance department to get kind of longer term projections in place, understand where we're headed with the budget, what are the challenges going to be, what are revenue and expense changes expected, capital, the like, hear from department heads, assemble this all into the winter, October, November, Q4, things start to take shape. Q1, we have the school right out of the gates. In the beginning of the year, we have the school's budget, which is obviously a key component of the town's from an assessment standpoint. Leadership meetings commence with the schools, with our partners in Hamilton. We then wrap things up, and we take it from this beast, right? From the this is actually I've got a stack of them in the closet that I'm being told I need to get rid of. This is FY19. We take it from that down to the warrant book and present a more distilled version to residents. So that's generally our process, and that's where we were. Of course, things changed, right? So instead of having the typical summer as most would in a bit of a break, we had COVID-19. So the impact, I think, is initially, we didn't respond initially as many did. We kind of settled into our daily routine, and then it became clear that FinCom needed to regroup and consider and partner with town officials as to what the impact was to the town immediately and also longer term, and also with respect to FY21, what should change, what could change, and what ultimately did. So we have been meeting every Wednesday at roughly this time, via Zoom, of course, for the past 8 or 10 weeks anyway, with Jackie, Anthony, Chris, and basically our role has been, our goal has been to assess the economic impact to revenue, right? Both in real time and in via projections. Now, a town like Wenham, of course, it derives most of its tax revenue, most of its revenue for expenditures from the backs of residents and personal real estate and property taxes, is in a somewhat unique situation, unlike a city like Beverly, whereby restaurants are immediately closed and we have an immediate tax hit from a commercial base. We don't have that, but there is an impact for sure. So we want to understand what that might look like for changes of revenue, understand expenses, immediate COVID-19 related expenses, pandemic response with respect to what is the state saying on legislation, what can town meeting do, what about 112 budgets, things like that. And then determine whether or not there are modifications to the budget, and obviously hear from our key partners in the school administration and school committee as to whether there's a change as well. So that's been our kind of past 10, 12 weeks, for which I would like to thank not only folks in Town Hall, but also FinCom, who have been unbelievably dedicated, and not despite it being out of the ordinary circumstances, I think full attendance at every single one of those meetings, full committee. Here's an example on the next slide of cash flow updates that Chris Holek, our interim finance director, has assembled for us, and we would look at this every 2 weeks to get a sense for. I'm not going to go through each and every one of the numbers. As an artifact of the presentation will be in the packet and online, but basically this gives us a sense for how much motor vehicle excise tax do we have yet to be received? What about real estate taxes that were due May 1st? So understanding trends, are we exactly where we were last year? Are we a little bit behind? Are we kind of on par with, for example, some motor vehicle excise tax checks paid via check by residents were delayed because of the COVID impact in processing those payments through our lockbox, banking partners that we contract with to receive those payments and provide the money back to the town electronically. Those have been kind of rectified, and the issue there was taken care of. But as you can see at the bottom there, net position of 50,000. I mean, we're talking $20 million budgets perhaps, but we are we're not flush with cash, so to speak, in the town. So of significant concern is the town's ability to continue its ongoing operations and make payments, not just in the form of payroll and to the schools for the assessment, but for all of the ongoing operations that are required. We had immediate reductions in expenditures when you think about some operations ceasing, but we had many continued expenditures, obviously, and then some net new through that cost the town due to COVID. Transitioning to revenues for the FY21 budget, you can look at your revenues, figure out your sources of revenue, and then cut away at it to cover your expenditures, or you can build up from the expenditures. I'm just starting with revenues for no particular reason. We'll of course look at expenditures. This slide back several months ago before the shutdown, Mike Therian, Jim Purdy, and I delivered the first of two budget updates along these lines at the Wenham Council on Aging. The second was not held, it was canceled based on the timing. I have some updated numbers on this, but I wanted to show this version anyway of this slide initially. Hopefully it's clear enough to see that as in general, it's a waterfall chart ending with a total of 20,600,000 thereabouts on the right. That's the town revenue. The biggest green chunk on the far left is the prior year levy limit. So when we start in on our budgeting process and understanding our revenue, we of course start with that and add up to or add a maximum of 2.5% for Proposition 2.5 over the prior year's levy limit. There are of course debt exclusions, which this doesn't seek to address. Total local receipts we add to that. That's our second biggest chunk of revenue. And that includes, among other things, motor vehicle excise tax is a big chunk of that. To that, we add new growth to the town, net state aid, which is a smaller piece to my earlier comments that we don't rely heavily as a town on state aid, although there is an impact and a negative one at that for FY21. And then smaller pieces, transfers between funds, the debt exclusions, free cash used to balance the budget is a piece that we'll talk more about. And then we reduce some of that revenue that we set aside for abatements, especially in years where taxes have been increased and in the years immediately following, or if that trend continues, it's prudent to budget a fair amount for abatements so that we aren't missing out on revenue. Now, these numbers I have in parentheses just initial because things did change. As I mentioned, we took a number of steps to evaluate changes in revenue. They're updated slightly. The numbers at the bottom of the screen and this big pink Pac-Man, I didn't choose the colors. That's the Spotfire application, auto select. I don't bother playing with the colors. But anyway, the biggest piece is the maximum allowable levy at $1,724,500 approximately. 84% of the revenue that the town applies to its expenditures is from residential real estate taxes levied. We add to that free cash, 500,000. We'll talk about free cash. Local receipts, 2,670,000 thereabouts. Formatting didn't come across, and then net state aid is kind of a smaller slice. Now, the total revenue is down. It's still net of that reserve for abatement. reflects a reduction in the preliminary revenue forecast of $160,000, and that is in part due to reduced state aid expectations, as well as excise tax, motor vehicle excise taxes. I think it makes perfect sense to expect that with economic impact playing out more broadly. Even though Wenham is unique in many respects, everyone's feeling this in one way or another, and to expect that new car purchases will continue at the rate and pace. I mean, the industry is at a standstill. So given that meaningful amount of revenue from excise taxes, we have a hit there as well. I think what I'll do is pause for a second, and I want to move through these slides at a pace that's appropriate relatively quickly, because we're going to get into the meat of this. But I'm going to invite also FinCom members in particular, if they want to add something, because there's a good chance I miss a key point along the way. I'm going to look back to you from the slides. Please just throw your hand up, and I'll pause. I hope that's okay. Some free cash and capital highlights. I mentioned that free cash at $500,000 to balance the budget is something we want to touch upon. Real quickly, our most recent certified free cash, we don't have FY20, FY19, 950,000 thereabouts. Originally, pre-COVID, we planned on using 700,000 towards the operating, or to balance the budget, basically, to offset operating expenses. That was down from 750K in the years prior, at least a few years prior. So there had been a downward trend in free cash usage, which represents a structural deficit. If you apply free cash to the budget, then what you're doing is you're subsidizing the tax rate, especially in situations where you have excess levy capacity, which we don't. You're also reducing the override if you're in an override situation, which we are. So every additional dollar free cash that goes towards the budget is $1 lower for the potential operating overrides. And I'm just going to move this notification. And in doing so, that represents a structural budget. Now, it's not good budgetary practice from just a municipal financing standpoint to be using free cash for that reason. It's better used for one-time capital expenditures. We ended up reducing the amount of free cash further, as you see from third to fourth bullet, from 600,000 down to 500,000 in kind of this planning state that we've been in for the past few months. This is for a couple of reasons. One, we reduced some bigger ticket items like road capital reduction, for example, and library capital. We moved some operating budget items, deferred them to use free cash later during a fall annual town meeting. And we also moved some capital to the operating budget that was more immediate in need. So we took into consideration a large number of capital expenditures, the urgency with they're addressed, knowing that we wouldn't have an operating budget with approved items prior to the start of FY21, and therefore reduce the capital to 500,000. Excuse me, the free cash usage. Capital, just a couple quick bullets. 400,000 roughly was in the original FY21 budget, reduced to 200,000. As I mentioned, some deferred to the fall and also paid for with free cash. Fire truck is obviously a big ticket item, roughly $480,000, a little bit less, but might tick up to that based on pricing change. And the first year to be paid for in FY21 with an older fire capital account amount, which is relatively low, on the order of, I believe, less than $10,000, given that the financing is through a bond anticipation note or ban. It's relatively small the first year. Okay, I'll move forward then. From an expense side, I mentioned we started with revenue, now we're moving to expenses. Total budget expenses, 21.3 million. And if we jump back a couple, we see total revenue, right, is short of that. So, there's our deficit kind of starting to take shape. We have kind of just a categorical, pie chart here. the Hamilton Wenham Regional School District assessment is just over 55% of the town's operating budget for FY21. I'll try to go down in order of size then. Public safety, 11.5%. Sorry, the other category is so big at 9%. Public works, 7.5%, down to culture and recreation, 5%. General government, 6%, 6.5%. Here's just an overall breakdown of where the expenditures are. Doesn't change so much year to year. We have obviously seen an increase in the percentage of Wenham's operating budget that is attributed to the annual assessment from the schools. Now, taking it from just kind of a very high level, big picture, categorical view here to something a little bit more detailed, albeit way less of the massive kind of spreadsheets that we're all kind of working with. So it's a bit distilled down, are some expense trends. The initial voted budget in gray and the updated FY21 post-COVID, if you will, budget that we're moving forward with to town meeting in July in yellow. Now we see a couple of circled numbers. And by the way, let me just, before I get to those, so focusing on the yellow column as our FY21 budget, we have the revenue categories that we first started with in the pie chart, followed by the overall expense categories in the second block in this table. And then we have a couple circled numbers. So if neither override were to pass of the two that we'll talk about, excuse me, then just over 20,400,000 would be our kind of levy limit budget, which does not fulfill the needs of the town, inclusive of the school's assessment. So town and school needs are left unfunded. What would be needed is to continue operations, 21,371,000, and that we see kind of a breakdown there of town and school expenses. Now we have a breakdown, as you see, roughly 45, 55 thereabouts in terms of the split between non-school and school within the town's overall budget. The deficit to attain level services is 961,645. Now this was larger. This was 1.085 million when we were slated to go into town meeting back in the normal time frame. So we had wrapped up our budget process, and we had a two override scenario, one for the town's operations and one to fund the remainder of the school's assessment. So call it town override and school override. And the amounts were 360,000 on the town side and 720,000 ballpark on each, but very close on the school side. That was a 1/3, 2/3 split, of course, 360 and 720 for the total at 1.085, a little under 1.1 million for the total override. That split has changed because the school assessment, as we'll see in a couple minutes, has remained constant and is expected to remain constant. Not something that's within FinCom's, control, but we expect that to remain constant. But we were able to adjust, in fact, reduce the town override amount, and we'll get to that as well. We were able to take it from 360,000 to 237,000. Going to pause for a second. I want to look to my FinCom colleagues and see if anyone has something they want to add in that I've failed to point out. Carrie.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on the cut in the town override that was pre-COVID and post-COVID, and just let everyone know the work that the town put in and the impact it's having on the town for these further reductions. I just want to thank the town for their dedication to finding additional cuts under these tough times, and that reflects the difference in the pre-COVID and post-COVID override amounts.
Excellent point. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Carrie. It can't be understated how much work. I think the town's been in great hands. with Anthony, with Chris, with Jackie, and many others, department leads, public safety heads. I mean, everyone has really stepped up and done a ton. Select board, of course. And so I guess from the standpoint of the action that was taken for COVID, because it became clear that, well, you can't sit back and do nothing, even though it felt oddly like that's what was occurring in a lifestyle standpoint, being locked in. From the standpoint of the budget for FY21, just to put a couple more numbers on it, the town absorbed approximately $300,000 in revenue reduction in an already very difficult situation with a $1.1 million override that we faced, and also reduced the expenditures to the point where the town override came down further. Now, just a comment about the split between the override amounts, which I mentioned were very, very close to 1/3, 2/3. That amount was arrived at from a financial warrant article split standpoint, because there's just simply $1 amount that we need to arrive at to fully fund all operations that are deemed critical. And we're talking, level services budgets basically here on the town side, and I believe the school would state the same for theirs. That said, if we have 1.1 million and we're splitting it into 2 override articles, as was the option selected by the select board, you need to attribute and align a dollar amount with each of those, 50-50, 90-10, 60-40, whatever. The number that was selected, that 2/3, 1/3 split, school, town respectively, is based on the corresponding the percentage of the dollar increase year over year in each of their respective budgets. So if you took the total dollar increase from the towns, FY 2021, did the same for the schools, 2021, and put them both together, you would find that in percentage terms, 1/3 of that dollar increase attributable to the town and 2/3 to the schools, hence that split. I mentioned earlier, we're holding the school assessment as a line item in Wenham's budget constant. Now, the reduction in revenue, we could have allocated that to the towns or to the schools. I mean, I suppose from a policy standpoint, things don't need to be held constant. We could have held town expenditures the same, said state aided and motor vehicle excise tax are reduced, therefore the override goes up, period, right? And then you could allocate it any which way. But I think it bears repeating that through the efforts, as Carrie acknowledged, of the town with a little help from FinCom, the override on the town side is down, and it's down to $237,000-ish. Those really that's a critical dollar amount required to continue with level services at the town level. There's not a whole lot of kind of discretionary expenditure there, if any, that we found we should be addressing. As it is, a number of expenses have been deferred, some more recently, some for years, some we're finally addressing, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, Carrie, for adding that in. In terms of the override split, just a quick slide on these school enrollment trends, which we've looked at a whole lot in the past, but not in the past couple of years. We put this together back in FY19 when we had our first operating override for some time for the schools, and that was in large part due to increases in Wenham student enrollment relative to Hamilton's, relative to the total of students in the district. And what we see here, so we updated this, dusted it off from FY19 out of the last couple of years, and Hamilton enrollment for FY21 in blue is up, so they've seen kind of a little tick up, and Wenham's in green has somewhat kind of flattened out. Back when we had increasing cost pressures from the schools that were based not only on year-to-year operating increases on the school budget, but in large part due to the assessment shift, we were in the steeper part of the red curve here, where we're at roughly 1/3, below 1/3, 31% of the school's total budget, and now we're 36%. So it was a meaningful amount to absorb. That said, the curve in this red line, I'm sorry, is a 3-year rolling average of Wenham's student enrollment relative to the total. So this year, basically, of the school's budget that is not funded through state aid and other sources, that which is the assessed to the towns, we're responsible for 36.1% of. So this speaks to the fact that when we saw earlier in the pie chart with 55% of the town's budget going to the schools, the town is in turn paying for as well a larger percentage of the budget. And this is according to the intermunicipal agreement between the member communities and the regional school district in an apportionment formula which is well understood, clearly documented. I believe it's fair, and obviously we're paying more because we're sending more of our students and children to these excellent schools. But of course, it's hard to see the impact play out at times if we're levy constrained as we have been. So with that, I'm going to take a breather, and Carrie is going to speak to the next few slides as liaison on behalf of FinCom to the regional school district. She's put a couple slides together to help kind of continue this story. I'll advance slides as you need, Carrie.
Okay, thank you. So first I'm going to talk about just the overall school district budget, which, as you know, is paid for by Hamilton and Wenham. So the total budget, which I'm calling the gross operating budget, that includes state aid. The first budget that was passed by the school committee pre-COVID in February was $38.3 million roughly. You can see in that middle column. And as you know, post-COVID-19, we learned that the state aid is going to be reduced significantly. Roughly 20% is what they're estimating based on state legislatures' advice. So when you cut it 20%, that's a reduction of $1.274 million. And you see that post-COVID FY21 number there of $37 million. And that's a reduction of 3.3%. And again, that comes from expected state aid cuts. And just to go backwards in time a little bit, I wanted to mention that from FY20 to FY21, you see the $34.9 million to the first budget at 30.8 or 38.2 million. That's about a 9.57% increase from 20 to 21. A lot of people I hear talk about that 9.5% increase, and I just wanted to point out where it's coming from. Again, that's the total budget that includes state aid. So now I'm going to go on to a little more detail about the Wenham assessment. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the net operating budget for the school district does not include state aid. And the Wenham assessment comes from what we call the net operating budget. So here's FY20, and then you see pre-COVID FY21 and post-COVID FY21. And you can see, like if you look at the total assessment, that there's no change pre and post-COVID for the total assessment to both towns from the school district. And that's because all the cuts that the school is absorbing are coming from the state aid. So the Hamilton and Wenham assessments are not changing. And how that plays out for the Wenham assessment is that our assessment is, which I think Alex may have already mentioned, it's going to be 11.59 million. And that compares to 10.6 million in FY20. Does anyone have any questions or comments, thoughts? Next slide, please. And then where is the school district funding in Wenham's budget articles? We'll go through the articles a little bit more later, but just to highlight how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. In Articles 1 and 2, which is the levy limit and the free cash articles, there's 10.873 million, and then that's attributed to the school budget. And then Article 5 is the school override, and that's 723 million. I'm sorry, 723,000. And that totals the Wenham assessment of 11,596,796,000. I don't think I said that right. Anyway, there it is. Next slide, please. And this is just looking back a little bit over the past 5 years. of what the school district spending is compared to the Hamilton and Wenham town assessments by dollar amount from FY17 to FY21. The school operating budget are the blue lines. The Hamilton assessment is the orange, and then Wenham is green. And just a couple highlights on this. The Hamilton School District net operating budget has increased roughly about $6 million from FY17 to FY21, from about 26.2 million to a little less than 32 million. Wenham's assessment from FY17 to FY21 has gone up about 2.9 million, from 8.7 to 11.6 million over that 5-year period. And I just want to highlight just this past year from FY20 to 21, it increased by about 9.14%, or 959,000. And I think that's my last school slide. Alex, what's the next slide? Is that you? Oh, okay. So now I'll turn it back over to Alex unless anyone has any questions or comments.
Just one comment for myself. Just maybe want to make sure your phone's on mute. There's a lot of background noise. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I was hearing a little bit of noise too. So one comment, and maybe in part a double check question for Anthony and Jackie, but a question we get sometimes is on the increase, just walking down the street when someone stops you. What is the town increase been in expenditures in the gross operating budget that we had assembled initially? I want to say either 4.6 or 5.1%. I'm going to call it 5% year over year increase, and maybe I'm not going to normally, if we weren't on a somewhat formal session here, I would just check the spreadsheet. But Jackie or Anthony, do either of you have that number handy? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't. There's two computers going on too, and
That's okay. I'll come back to it towards the end, unless Carrie, you have it handy. I see Jackie just jumped off mute.
Okay, go ahead, Jackie.
I was going to say, typically we're between 3 to 4% year over year. I wouldn't say that it's as high as 5 for the town side in terms of annual expenses.
We did, in terms of, thank you, Jackie. And I would normally say the same. We have had some expense drivers, which aren't the focus of this presentation. We normally would look at as to what in the current and past, what's different about the current fiscal year versus like the past couple. And I would say that there are some notable expenses that perhaps bear a bit more focus, and maybe this is something we should incorporate in our warrant hearing, but I'm thinking about trash costs, for example, some insurance costs, things that we have little control over that are playing out in a manner that is hitting us a little harder now. In percentage wise and dollar terms, they're not as big, but I mean, we are in the $300,000-400,000 range for trash, and what we're finding is that there are some significant increases in for example, the hauling fees that we pay to Casella for recycling with no market for those materials and the like. So there are some other drivers that aren't the focus of this discussion. But Jackie, thanks for confirming. Yeah, normally I would have also said 3 to 4%, but thought it was a little higher this year. Okay, let's move to the meat of it. So we're almost 45 minutes in. Let's get to the levy limit. Excuse me, the warrant articles that are the key financial articles. Now, there has been a change, late breaking, with regard to obviously town meeting now scheduled for July 17th. And as of yesterday evening, select board finalized the time and place. We'll get to that. But in an effort to streamline things, rather than have our long dragged out, potentially long duration town meeting with lots of financial articles, things are going to be simplified a little bit, which is, I think, will be welcome. We do have, and from what I understand, also very late breaking. I'm not going to seek to cover it accurately here until I have more information, but that the order of the warrant articles might change a bit. So I'll ask that you please bear with me and not become too familiar with the article number. Everything else that you see before you here on the screen is accurate, but the number itself I believe, is changing for purposes of getting some consent articles up front. We have a levy limit budget, as always. Thus far has been deemed Article 1 for in conjunction with a free cash article. So we've historically, you may recall, had a levy limit budget as our primary article for the past few years when we've been in an override situation, coupled with a secondary usage of free cash to balance the budget article, which has been Article 2. Those two are the first bullet that you see here. So given our maximum levy limit increase of 2.5%, in the usage of $500,000 in free cash, those two will combine to establish the funding source and the authorization to place the levy upon that maximum levy upon residents for purposes of funding many but not all of the but not all of the appropriations. The remainder, of course, our shortfall, our deficit, is via the overrides, which, as has been discussed thus far, are in two primary articles, one of them being a town override and one of them being a school override. Second bullet describes the town override, 237,238, down from 361 originally, and holding constant the school override at 723,000 thereabouts. For this, those are our two overrides.
Alex?
Yes, Jim, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt. On Article 1, just to restate, could you give the Article 1 number of the total within the 2.5 levy limit number?
Yes.
So we have that on.
I don't have it in here. That's an oversight
Alex,
that's the 20,409,000
20,409
number.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And does that include, I don't want to click away to the Excel because it's on screen share with presentation mode. The 20,497,000, does that include the free cash usage or net of?
That includes the free cash usage. So the 20,409,000 and change is based on the use of the free cash to create a balanced levy limit budget.
Thank you, Jackie. And thanks, Jim, for pointing that out. That
Yeah,
absolutely should be there. Yep. No, that's a big number to not have on the slide, and my error in omission. Okay. So those are the articles, and then of course the budget article, the override articles now are 961,000 versus 1.085, 1.1 million. Yes, Carrie.
Hi, I would just like to bring something to the town's attention, who will be voting on June 25th.
Hold on.
Carrie, 1 second.
Sorry. Do you have anything in the presentation later that does a crosswalk between the warrant articles and the ballot, or would this be a good opportunity to talk about the differences in the numbers in the ballot versus the articles?
I do not, so that's a good opportunity. Why don't you take the opportunity to now? It's a good idea.
I just wanted to bring it to people's attention that on the back of the Wenham ballot for voting by June 25th, either in person or by mail, the first question is related to the Wenham override, and it has the number of 361,640. And that's something that we mentioned earlier, that through the town's hard work, we've reduced that. And you can see it's gone down in the second bullet to 237.9 thousand. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. That's the same pot of money. It's the same budget. The first ballot question crosswalks to Article 3, and the difference is just because of the town cuts. So, but they both need to pass for the override to go through at 237. Thanks.
Thanks, Carrie. No, important points. We'll look at the impact of these articles. And again, one other kind of procedural or technical matter as it relates to, this is a question that we've received, the ballot taking place, the election and ballot voting taking place prior to town meeting, with a larger dollar amount on the ballot, as Carrie indicated. That does not mean that the town would spend or seek to levy that larger amount on residents if, for example, both overrides at the ballot passed at town meeting subsequent to the election. The correct lower revised town override number will be before residents to vote on. So if it passes it at the ballot, which it has to succeed, as well as at town meeting to succeed, the lower amount is appropriated. With the higher amount authorized at the ballot, we appropriate the lower appropriate amount, and the town doesn't spend that money. I trust that many people probably know that, but I think it just is important to point out because there is a discrepancy in that amount just owing to the course of events.
Alex?
Jim, yes.
Article 4, does that continue to still be in place? Loose leaf?
Jim, would you, if you'd like to speak to it, I can go to a slide that I have.
So with the selectmen, the finance committee together have proposed a separate warrant article and an override for loose leaf pickup and the amount of $50,000. This has been discussed for the past several years, and this year we decided to put it on as a separate warrant article. The loose leaf pickup is a significant cost to the community. So we felt that it was time that we had a separate discussion about this in terms of a separate warrant article. The finance committee, just as FYI to the community, voted not to support this article. There would continue to be a bag pickup twice a season by Casella, as opposed to the trucks coming around with the vacuum. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim, for doing so. I trust that the slide is up. It stopped. I had to reshare. Yeah. Thank you. And this is a kind of a nuanced one because from the standpoint of savings, there's an indirect relationship, very real one, as Bill Tyak, the head of our DPW, has pointed out, wherein work that could and would otherwise be done by his crew cannot be done because of leaf pickup and the resource drain there. And that work that could be done needs to be out, specifically the stormwater outfall testing for the DEP requirements of MS4 stormwater permitting is then outsourced at a meaningful cost to the town. So if you could help people understand how that works, we would appreciate it, because it's not an easy one to think through, but it is certainly legitimate as far as FinCom is concerned and town officials. We can save money by not paying a contractor, a great engineering service that we partner with, by not paying them to do work that the DPW staff can do if we were not picking up leaves.
Alex?
Anthony?
Just clarify too on the loose leaf, that's contingent on the override for the town passing, just to take mention of that.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, right. If the town, the primary town override, very separate from loose leaf, as Jim pointed out, we support the this being the time and certainly the place to no longer fund that operation for loose leaf. But if the primary town override were to fail, then this would not be an option on the table at all, because we're talking service and/or staff cuts should the town override not succeed, not pass at both town meeting and ballot. So, Jim, I'm glad you brought that up. I jumped back to this slide, which I think we've pretty much hit upon, although it is key. We'll look now to, as we traditionally do, the impact on the residential tax rate for the warrant articles. And there are more lines in this table than typically because of the addition of both the town operating override, which has not been the case for the past 2 fiscal years, and then separating out the loose leaf. Otherwise, you still have this standard structure. So to walk through, so how does this play out? It looks relatively straightforward as a incremental build, which in large part it is, but there's some jumping around that you need to do and kind of think through when you evaluate what the impact is, because keep in mind, these are not a la carte options from the standpoint of the override articles. You can't say, I want to fund, the town, but not the schools, or vice versa, or I want to fund the loose leaf only. There are contingencies, as Anthony pointed out. There's also the matter of, in order to have an approved budget, for example, for the regional school district, the assessments to Wenham and Hamilton need to be fully funded, which is done as a course of the appropriation and authorization at town meeting and the ballot, respectively, in the case of an override. So what that means is, in order for the school's budget to be approved, the school override has to pass. There is some technical recourse, should it not pass, that the schools have the ability to regroup, revisit, and according to the procedural guidelines and intermunicipal agreement with Hamilton and Wenham, are able to, if needed, represent, reauthorize, recertify another budget, present it to the towns. The town doesn't have that ability should the town override not fail. So that's worth pointing out. So anyway, the way this works is relatively straightforward. The override amount is in the first column. The cumulative amount, 0 for the levy limit, in which case you have the current tax rate, holding everything else constant. So this is absolutely an estimate, and it cannot be known exactly what it is. Despite the fact that the warrant article amounts are known, we don't know what the town market value will be in a year's time. And so you can hold certain things constant and make estimations, but I guarantee you our tax rate will probably not be any of the numbers that are on this slide exactly. This is just the impact knowing what we know now. Add for two debt exclusions, the fire truck and school capital. If those were to be added, it has a very limited impact on the tax rate to the tune of no dollar increase or that of a penny on the mill rate from the current $18.94 to $19.50. Okay, so looking at our levy limit budget, taxes go up 2.9%. Okay, well, wait a second. Thought Prop 2.5 had a 2.5% increase only, but keep in mind that's the increase to the levy limit. The actual tax rate calculation is different, and by all means, even without an override, your taxes can increase more than 2.5% in a given year. The columns off to the right, we have the year-over-year increase, which I just pointed out. The estimated median tax bill, and then the increase. So what is not shown is the current increase, the current median tax bill, which would be somewhere on the order of $10,890 or something like that. And the dollar increase would be to the median home valued at current numbers at $575,000 thereabouts. So that number, of course, changes. The market value of all property that receives an assessment, the town changes, and thus the real estate tax mill rate changes. Then we add to this the two overrides shaded in light and dark blue. Dark blue town override, $237,000, would add another 80 cents to the tax rate, which in total brings us from 1894 to 1974. Okay, so it's not incremental on top of the 1949, for example, that we see in the row for the fire truck debt exclusion. It's on top of the current tax rate, and that's how you would read this. That would be 4.2% increase in the tax rate. If both overrides pass, combined, you have a 7.1% increase. Okay, you would look at that if that were to pass. Excuse me, those two are independent. The line below, the row below, town and school overrides, those would have the impact of an incremental $1.64 on the tax rate, bringing that to an estimated $20.58. And that would represent an 8.7% increase. Okay. Now, the loose leaf override, which does, if successful, would preclude us from realizing a little bit of savings, and the operating budget ticks up a little bit. Obviously not a lot, adds another couple pennies to the tax rate. And so the rate increase is still in the 8.8% range. If you see where I'm going with this, if the overrides and loose leaf or all overrides pass, then it's a, handily 9% tax rate increase. Estimation, given what we have available to us at this time with regard to market value assessment and the like. So a difficult situation that we're in. Obviously, we want residents to understand the process, where we started this year, where we thought we ended prior, just before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then where we've been since, and some of the changes that we feel were appropriate to make. Not easy decisions, but that resulted in a slightly less painful tax rate increase. That said, we recognize that this is a significant tax increase that we're asking the legislative body of town meeting to consider. Now, that's the last kind of slide in our prepared remarks, and it's been exactly 1 hour. This leaves us time for Q&A, so we are more than happy to take questions. Before, I think what I'll do is I'm happy to jump around to different slides if people have questions, and we can bounce back for reference purposes. But first, I'll just put on the screen the upcoming key dates, which are the warrant hearing on July 6th, also a Zoom meeting, so we'll see you then. The town election on June 25th. I suppose I should have changed the order. Yeah. First up would be the election on the 25th, and that's at Bucher Elementary. Then the warrant hearing, and then annual town meeting at Pingree Park outside on July 11th. So there you have it. There are the key dates.
A comment, Alex?
Sure, Jim and Carrie. Yep.
Regarding the town election, I understand, the last that I understood was that approximately 400 ballots have been requested from the town clerk's office. Do we have a sense of how many folks have voted already, returned those ballots? Maybe Jackie or...
Well, 30 of them are mine, but I don't know about the rest. Sorry.
Do
The last
we have
update
any
I
sense
had...
of
Yes, Jim, I'm happy to answer that. The last update I had from Diane Bucco was roughly that 200 or so had been returned out of the 400 that we had requested. So we do encourage everyone to continue to return your absentee ballots either in the tax drop box outside Town Hall, by mail, or delivering them before June 25th so they can be counted. So please mail them in, drop them off. She's collecting them every day. So please do remember to turn in your ballot if you requested one.
Thank you, Jackie.
Also, we had a question from a resident that was submitted about the fire truck. Did we talk about the fire truck? I don't recall, but the question was, what's the amount of the fire truck? Because there's no amount listed on the ballot, which is the last question on the back of the ballot, and why is it needed? So I didn't know if anyone wanted to speak to that.
I know Chief Kavanaugh's here. Chief?
Hello. Check volume. Would you like me to read what I read last night at the Selectmen's meeting?
Sure.
The need for the Wenham Engine 4 replacement. The cost to replace Engine 4 at this current time would be approximately $475. Like Alex said, it could go to $480. It's just a placeholder with the 480. To put a hold on this purchase would only raise the cost in the future due to manufacturing increases. In August of 2019, all fire department vehicles were inspected by the state. During the inspections, the inspector found the right side frame of engine 4 with extreme rust, corrosion, and frame separation. There was also body separation due to the weakened frame. The inspector informed me that he will not be inspecting engine 4 next August if this was not fixed and would be put out of service due to safety concerns. The estimated cost of repairing the frame was $175,000, providing no other problems are found while replacing the frame. If other problems are found, that would escalate the cost to repair rather quickly. On this particular engine, everything is attached to the frame, wires, brake lines, everything. Engine 4 was built in 1999 and will be 21 years old, and it's very few years left. And I feel it would be money better spent putting towards new than old. Even if you did repair this truck, it would basically fall into a reserve status. People have been asking why the need for 2 pumper trucks and not just one. If the town were to go with only 1 pump, the ISO, which is the Insurance Services Office rating, that is used by all insurance companies to determine premiums for commercial and residential fire insurance, will go up. This cost increase would be determined by the ISO and would affect the residential fire insurance premiums. The department's standard response to any fire alarm incident is 2 pumps and a ladder. That is to stay compliant with NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. This is the standard. Again, if this standard is not met, it will affect the ISO rating for fire insurance premiums. When the fire department responds to a fire incident at a home, the first engine will arrive and go just beyond the house and pull multiple hand lines and start attacking the fire with the water in the tank of the engine. The engine pulls just past the house to leave room for the ladder truck to set up venting operations and possible rescues from upper floors. The second engine will arrive and take the nearest hydrant and lay a 5-inch diameter line to the first engine and supply water to the scene. With crews in the building and working off of the initial tank water, it is extremely important for safety reasons to have the second engine supply water and also pull a secondary hand line to protect the first crews in case there is a failure with the first pump. This meets NFPA standard for firefighter safety. The second engine not only provides a water source, but is also carrying much needed equipment to the scene, such as SCBAs, which are self-contained breathing apparatus, ground ladders, lighting, hand tools, thermal imager, etc., etc. Engine 4 is a vital piece to our fleet. The engine responds to a working fire, motor vehicle accidents, brush fires, Gordon College, highway incidents, Beverly Airport, mutual aid. Engine 4 will also respond to any secondary incidents if we have back-to-back incidents. Engine 4 responded to 104 calls in the last year. 23 of those calls were for mutual aid. Mutual aid, whether we are covering a station or going direct to the fire or being the RIT team, which is the Rapid Intervention Team. It is extremely important to have. Even though we don't receive mutual aid as much as we give, it is important to get it when needed. If the department had to come off mutual aid, it will change the way we fight fires. Most all fires would be fought from the exterior with no interior attack. The engine that the department would like to purchase would be identical to engine 3. Having the same engine, this would make training on the operation of these vehicles easier. Instead of training on 2 different pump panels, it would be all the same. I believe if the town doesn't support a second truck, it will not only affect the safety of the members of this department, but the citizens around. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Alex, we have another question that was sent in prior to the meeting, and the question is, how much money has the town received from the state to defray costs on COVID-19, and how has this affected the budget? I'm happy to take that one. The
Great,
town,
thanks.
first of all, this was federal money that was part of the CARES Act, and it was from municipalities. It went to the state of Massachusetts. Wenham was eligible for $465,878. There's 3 criteria for the use of those funds. It has to be COVID related. It has to be expenses that occurred from March 1st to December 30th. And the third part is it's unbudgeted, and you can't use it for revenue shortfalls. So that was pretty restrictive. So how does that affect the budget? Unfortunately, it doesn't. It's something that I've tried lobbying the federal government. I was on a call with Senator Warren, and stressed that although we appreciate the funds like this, a community like ours and several other across the Commonwealth are going to have a hard time maybe spending all that money with that under the restrictions that they have. So there is a pending bill that was passed at the House and sits in the Senate right now, and that would allow a little bit more leniency, or actually a lot that could allow us to use that for the next for budget shortfalls. So that's not the case yet. So we're living within the restrictions that are placed on us. Let me check here, see if any. We have a question. What is the cost or increase in the tax rate for passing override for loose leaf pickup? I will look forward to tracking the rising trash hauling cost in the future. Yeah, just to clarify that, Alex, too, on the trash, it was actually the incinerator cost that went up considerably. The hauling goes up every year anyways at 2.5%, roughly 3%. But where we saw the significant increase was where Casella dumps our trash, which is in the incinerator in Saugus. That went up, I believe it was almost 19%. So that contributed to that 3 to 4% that we were talking about at our budget going up, and maybe including with the health insurance too, because our health insurance, the first numbers that we got for employee health was 12.9% increase, and that was through Harvard Pilgrim. What we did is we as a town and my team did a great job, and we were actually able to go out and change our health insurance provider and received a 7 or 8% increase, between 7 and 8% increase. So we saved a significant, about $60,000, which helped us lower that override. That was another contributing factor to lowering the override from 361 to 237. I don't see any other questions on the board, so I'll go to some other ones.
The loose leaf increment, Anthony.
Oh, sorry. Right. Oh, I think that, so the point with the loose leaf is, again, that's contingent on the town's override passing. So if the town's override fails that 237,000, there is no loose leaf collection. Why? Because at 237,000, because we've already really drastically reduced everything that we possibly could to reduce the override because of the revenue shortfalls, that we could be looking at some kind of reduction in staff. And certainly we don't have the staff to be able to do loose leaf.
Anthony, could you just generally outline what the impact might be if the town override doesn't pass? I know you just mentioned staff. Is there other general categories that would be impacted that you've been working on with the department heads?
Yeah, so once the COVID hit and we went back and looked at those revenues, we went back to all our departments and we really stripped away everything. And what we did is we realized that because of this pandemic, there were some items that were projects that we needed to take on, but realistically, we weren't going to be able to take it on because unfortunately, I think COVID's going to be with us for some time, and hopefully it's not as bad. And hopefully we never get to the situation where the state has to close again like that. So we're really at bare bones on this. So there's not much left other than, you know, when we talk about 85% of our expenses is in personnel, we're at that point, Jim.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of personnel in Wenham. We really don't.
We're pretty bare bones on all our departments.
We are.
Thanks for answering those questions, Anthony, and Jim, for clarification. Jackie.
I just wanted to clarify the question that we had received about the tax rate impact of loose leaf. So if you look at the chart on the screen, I just want to make sure that this is answered for the questioner. Right. It is actually a very small cents on the dollar in regards to the impact of loose leaf, because the loose leaf pickup is actually over and above our the deficit that Alex talked about earlier. So earlier we talked about the level services for both, as identified by the towns and the schools, as roughly $961,000 deficit. And so the $50,000 for the loose leaf would be over and above that dollar amount as a specific project. So that $50,000 for the loose leaf, the way the selectmen addressed it, can only be used for that purpose. It's a specific policy question on the ballot and can only be used for that. They did make it contingent on the town override passing. But if, for example, on the ballot, the loose leaf question passed, the town override failed, number one, the selectmen have made the question of function where it's contingent, as Anthony pointed out, but furthermore, that $50,000, if it were to pass, could only ever be used for loose leaf pickup. It's a specific question about that specific service, and they're tied together based on the way the selectmen formatted it. And I just wanted to make that clear. I know Alex put up the chart, but I just wanted to make sure folks understood that piece.
Thank you. That's helpful, Jackie. And it is nuanced for all the reasons that you just described. We also know that it's a hot topic for many residents who greatly appreciate the service and the hard work that goes into it. And I'm among those people, so I appreciate it a lot. And for sure, I think we talked about a lot as a FinCom, and we very much support the Select Board's decision to make it its own separate article, to really turn it over to residents to say, if you wish to receive the service and cover the associated cost in your real estate taxes, you're given that vote, which I think is what's great about town meeting.
Alex, we don't have any more questions that were submitted. I'm checking the chat board too. At this point, it's been, I think we're at that point at 7:45. So not sure if you want to just maybe have some, every individual committee member maybe have some closing thoughts and bring the meeting to a close. Thoughts?
Yep. Sorry, there's a delay from when I unmute to when it activates. Yeah, that sounds good. So I will
actually one more question, Alex. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The question is, can you align the fourth ballot question with the budget on the screen? So I don't know, Carrie, do you have the fourth ballot question?
Yes, that's the school capital debt exclusion. And
yes.
Do we have a slide on that?
No, not dedicated to it. Let's see if I can drum something up.
Alex, I can share that if you'd like.
That would be great.
Yep, we'll do.
Thank you, Jackie. I was going to pull up the budget roll up and get that information, but if you have it handy, or from the school district.
Carrie, it should be there. Can you see it so you can speak to it?
Yeah, I actually can't read it, and I'm wearing my new glasses.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'm gonna see if I can find my heart. Well, I can read it off the ballot, or Also, Jim, did you want to talk about it? Were you covering the school capital debt exclusion or no?
No, I don't believe I was.
I can go through the line items quickly if you like, just
Okay.
to get it out there, the information. So thanks for pulling this up. This is from the capital budget that was approved by the school committee. So the school committee and administration are putting forth the $958,000 5-tier. I thought there were 5 items. I'm seeing 6, but let's go through them. $350,000 under the safety category, subclass building. Another $110,000 for the safety category under site. So the first one is for security infrastructure improvements. School committee has long talked about the need to improve security, and it relates to a number of things. I'm not going to attempt to represent all of them. You know, think the modern day needs for things like cameras and secure access to the building and the like. I shouldn't go much further because I'll say the wrong thing. $250,000 professional services, learning environment. That's elementary school facilities study and educational plan. $120,000 for classroom furniture and equipment. $65,000 for athletic campus improvement project. That's a design project services. $63,000 for network infrastructure improvements, for a total again of $958,000. And as a debt exclusion, that was the corresponding amount that we had for the override amount. For the debt exclusion article.
All right, thank you. Now I definitely don't see any more new questions. So back to you, Alex, for closing.
Okay, great, thank you. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to actually extend a special thank you to Mike Therian. Mike has been on the FinCom for 6 years. He's wrapping up his full second tour on FinCom. His second 3-year term is fulfilled at the end of this fiscal year, but not so fast, Mike. As we know, appointments have been extended, which is awesome because we want you there on our side. We're all on the same side. We want you there with us at annual town meeting. And so despite the fact that Wenham bylaws require that you roll off and give someone else a seat at the table after 2 consecutive terms, after 6 years, if that's what you've done, which not everyone does, but Mike has, and provided awesome, thoughtful discussion, challenging questions, definitely tough questions, we all know, which we welcome, great leadership, and really, I think, a great member of the community with the community's best interests in mind. And really great partner to work with for all of us in the FinCom. So I just want to give a special thank you here publicly to you, Mike, and very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
Embarrassed now.
No,
Hard work.
not at all. Enjoy the new house. So if that's it, then I'll just let anyone else at FinCom chime in with anything I missed before we adjourn. Carrie, yes.
No, if anyone is interested in applying to be on the FinCom, since Mike is leaving, submit questions or submit a letter of interest to Nikki Roebuck in Town Hall.
Definitely. David, yes.
Let me just unmute. Just a comment to all the committee members. You know, again, we no one knows what party affiliation we are. No one, there's no insults for the year. We get along really, really well. When we disagree, it's done cordially and professionally without name calling, interruption. We're very, we have good manners to each other. I just want to let the town know and the committee members know I'm very appreciative of it with everything that's going on in today's world. Some professionalism and just good people trying to do their best is good to be on the committee. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David. Yep,
Thanks, David.
appreciate that. Yep. All true. All right. Well, then I think we may have wrapped up, and it looks like in the allotted time. Thanks everyone for attending, and then I guess I'll ask FinCom if there's a motion to adjourn.
So
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, David. All in favor? Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Hi, David. Hi, David.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Jim.
Terrific.
Postscript.
That's what I guess.
If anyone has any follow-up questions from the town, feel free to reach out to anyone on the FinCom or anyone in Town Hall. You know, we're available to answer questions.
All true. Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.